Lecture 15, Conflict Resolution Stages. Conflict is inevitable, but combat is optional. I think that's quite a good quote for this topic because it really highlights some of the things that we've spoke on before about conflict management styles. Using some of those tactics that will be combative is not always necessary, but it is an option if it is necessary, if it is needed. So what is conflict? As we mentioned before, conflict is an expressed struggle between at least two interdependent parties who perceive incompatible goals, scarce resources, and interference from other parties to achieve their goals. Now, often we approach the conflict resolution with a sort of wing it attitude. We jump in with no clear understanding of the nature of our particular conflict or the potential solutions to that conflict. Now, granted, we may not always have the time to organize our thoughts and perceptions on a conflict, and that's usually where the combat comes in. But when you do have time, there are some things that need to be considered so that you can have a successful end to the conflict. Now, below are a restatement of the 5 steps in conflict resolution. Now, these things we have briefly touched on before. I'm just going to go into a little bit more detail with these so that you have a full, comprehensive understanding of the conflict resolution stages, because they are truly, truly helpful in most every conflict, regardless of whether it's a interdependent conflict with two people, interpersonal conflict, or a small group conflict, or an intrapersonal conflict. It really does apply to most every situation. So if those involved in the conflict actually take time to go through these steps, there really is a greater chance of reaching a successful solution. So let's recap some of these some of these steps and get into a little bit more detail with each of them. So step 1, define the conflict. So what do? In this case, you are figuring out what the issues are. You want to look at whether they are content issues or relational issues. And what I mean by that is if you have a content issue, it is something that deals with very obvious basics. They're surface level, they're easy to define. I need money to repair my car. The conflict is that I don't have the money to repair my car. It's very surface level. It's very easy to define. A relational issue is centered around your relationship with a person, and it's often a little bit more difficult to see. So, for example, I might say to my husband, I'm sick and tired of you throwing your socks on top of the hamper instead of in the hamper. Maybe you've experienced a conflict just like this. Well, let's say that's our conflict. The content level of that conflict is that I'm tired of the socks being on top of the hamper instead of in the hamper. The relational side of that conflict is there's a level in my head, a level of disrespect that he knows that I will likely go around and clean up the messes that are left laying on the floor or laying on top of the hamper. So I feel there's some level of disrespect, or maybe I feel like maybe he's thinking I'm his mother and I should be the one cleaning everything up. It's probably not how he actually feels, but that is something that goes through my mind. So a content level is the easy stuff, and the relational level is the deeper things that sometimes we don't even really understand we're feeling. So again, the defining of the conflict is not an easy thing. You have to be very careful and very thoughtful about the emotions that you're experiencing and why you're experiencing them. So figure out what the issues are. Number 2, stay in the present. I mentioned this last time, no gunny sacking. Gunny sacking is basically keeping past frustrations bottled up inside and then throwing them all out at one person at one time when that load gets too heavy. So imagine you've got this rucksack on your back, and every time something bad happens, either between you and that person or just something in general negative happens, you throw it in that backpack and you leave it there. And when it gets too heavy, when there's too much in there for you to carry anymore, whoever is present at the time that adds that last piece, you chuck it at them. Another way I've heard this proposed is a 6% event. I am wondering if any of you out there have heard of this before, but I think it's a great example. You start out your day on 0, And occasionally things will happen throughout your day that will add to your percentage of the amount of things that you can handle in a given day. So you stub your toe getting out of bed, and that's upped it to 5%. So you started at 0 with no conflict. Now you're at a 5% baggage of conflict. Then later on, you lose a major contract at work, and you have upped that by another 50%. So now you're at 55, and so on and so forth. If you're having one of those days where you have reached like 95% stress level, 95% conflict for that day, 95% of the junk that you can take, and then someone comes along and does something that's really only a 6% event, it's only something like stubbing your toe. It's not losing a major contract or anything like that, but it's a little thing, but it pushes you over the 100%. So now you're at 101 rather than if you had not had those major events earlier in the day, you would never have reached that explosive moment. So anyway, you're feeling all these angry issues because you've held them in or because you've had to deal with them all so quickly. So be careful of that. Keep that in mind if you kind of snap at that 6% event, or you throw your baggage at somebody because they're there. So be careful. Try to stay in the present. Empathize with the person that you are in conflict with, if at all possible. Even if you really don't understand why they're feeling what they're feeling, attempt to. Just the attempt alone will make a huge difference in how they perceive the conflict. It will make them more willing to work with you and less willing to purposely try to sabotage or fight you on a subject. If you empathize with them, if you try to feel what they feel, if you try to relate to them. And avoid mind reading. Again, these are things we talked about before. I'm just trying to give you a little bit more depth. Don't make assumptions about what they're feeling and why they're feeling it. Now, you can ask clarifying questions. You can say, so are you saying this? Or, okay, so you don't want me to do that? Those kinds of things are okay. Ask clarifying questions. Paraphrase what they say so that you can make sure you understand. But don't just project what you think they feel onto them. Okay? I know that I react a certain way to certain things. For example, when I'm very quiet, I'm typically upset. Not everybody reacts to frustration or anger that way. But if somebody else comes into a conversation and they are upset, or excuse me, and they're quiet, I automatically assume something's wrong, that they're upset. And that may absolutely not be the case, but that's how I tend to perceive it because that's the way I would do it. So try to avoid that mind reading because many times you're wrong. But that's the step that you want to take initially, and it typically is one of the most difficult steps. Fully defining the conflict, understanding it completely without sabotaging yourself. Once you've done that, or once at least you think you've done that, then you move to step 2, examining the possible solutions. So again, brainstorm ideas. Don't censor the person that is speaking. Allow them to give as many ideas as you do, and never hinder them by saying, well, that would never work. I can't do that. Don't say things like that. Allow their ideas to be possibilities. You actually never know. If you really think about it, if you really attempt it, they may have a perspective you've never considered before. And look for a win-win. We talked about this last time. We mentioned collaboration. There is no sacrifice in collaboration. Nobody gives anything up. It is a win-win. Each person walks away equally content, equally happy, equally achieving what they want. Going back to the orange example about the 2 sisters that wanted the one orange. If you have defined your conflict appropriately, a win-win is easy, that you can juice the orange for the one sister and you can give the peel to the other sister for the zest. So really look for that win-win. Neither one of those folks walks away with any loss at all. And it may not be possible, but it's a probability if you really consider it. Next is to look at costs and rewards. Again, going back to social exchange. Add up your costs and add up your rewards. If you come to a positive outcome, then you're probably doing okay with each of those solutions. But if the costs outweigh the rewards for a given solution, you're probably wanting to avoid that solution unless that is appropriate for a situation. And I'm not sure whether it is. A lot of times you can consider a parent-child relationship in this ballpark. The kid often feels like they are losing out. It's costing them a lot, when it's really not. It's just the way that the parent has to approach the problem. However, that may not be the case for your specific conflict. So check out as many solutions as you can come up with together, and then check those solutions and see what the costs and rewards are for each and whether they're win-win. And then finally, once you have all that lists of solutions, you're going to pick one and you want to test it. So step 3 is to test the solution. So you're going to first look at it mentally. Imagine what it would look like if you tried that solution. So maybe I am frustrated with my child because they don't clean up their room and their room is always trashed. And I've come up with all these solutions. We've together worked out a solution to where I'm the reminder. We set an alarm on her phone that says, okay, when this alarm goes off, that means clean your room. No matter, drop everything and clean your room. And she picks the time of day that the alarm goes off at every day. Okay, so say that's the solution we came up with. Now we're going to look at it together. We're going to go, okay, well, what if it's 9 o'clock at night and you're exhausted and you don't want to clean your room? What if you pick 9 o'clock at night? Well, then how's it going to feel? And you think about those things. Think about what the solution might project, what might happen in a given situation. And if you come to the conclusion that there may be some drawbacks, but on the whole, I think this would work out, then you're going to put that solution into practice. Once you do that, then you can move to step 4, which is to evaluate the solution. So did it work? How did the solution work? Did the whole thing fail? All right, so going back to the example with the alarm that my daughter is going to set to clean her room. So say she sets it for 9 o'clock at night, and we've tested it for a week. Did the solution work? Did the whole thing fail? Did she never clean her room at any point in time during that week at 9 o'clock? Or at all? Or did the whole thing succeed? Alarm went off at 9 o'clock. Every day she cleans her room. Or did it partly succeed and partly fail? She had it cleaned fairly regularly, but there were 3 or 4 of those days, well, that would be a lot, let's say 2 or 3 of those days where it didn't succeed. That she was too tired, or she was gone and couldn't have cleaned, or something like that. So it didn't all the way succeed, but it did help her to clean her room more than she had been before. So once you figured that out, then you can say, all right, well, why did it succeed or fail? Why did she have such success with this? Maybe that time of day was perfect. Or maybe she failed. Maybe she never cleaned her room at 9 o'clock. Why is that? Maybe that time was horrible. And what would have happened differently if you had done anything different with that solution? So if you had set the timer for a different time, or maybe you had adjusted it so that it was in the mornings or the afternoons on Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and it was in the evenings on Tuesday, Thursday, or whatever it might be. What would be different if you had done this solution in a little bit of a different way? And once the evaluation is done, then you can move to step 5, which is to accept or reject the solution. Obviously, if everything was successful, you accept it and you exit the conflict. If it wasn't quite so successful, you are going to have to reject that solution, and you're going to move back to either steps 1, 2, 3, or 4. So if you decided to go back, you're going to have to figure out which step to go back to. Again, we sort of mentioned this last time. Maybe you just step back one level and you go, all right, maybe I didn't really think about this clearly. Let's think about this a little bit more and evaluate it more. So you're moving back to step 4. Or maybe you tested it at the wrong time. So the whole idea of the alarm is great, but 9 o'clock didn't work. Or maybe thinking about a different conflict, maybe it's a issue you're having with your significant other, and you decided to text that discussion instead of talking to them face to face or on the phone. And that's what didn't go well. So you need to test the solution in a different way. Maybe that solution just didn't work and you need to go way back to step 2 and examine different solutions. Or finally, which a lot of people find themselves doing, maybe you need to go all the way back to step one and define that conflict again. So if that's the case, maybe you didn't stay in the present. Maybe you held on to those things and used those to define the conflict. Maybe you thought it was a content issue, but it was really a relational issue. So that may be the case. Maybe you got to go back and you've got to redefine that conflict. That's where you leave once you've gotten to step 5. And again, you go through the process all over again if you did reject that initial solution. So conflict resolution stages above, they seem simple enough as long as we follow the steps. Every conflict should come out just peachy, right? Now, as you've probably already experienced, conflict resolution is really not easy. Each person in the conflict is different, and we each view the world differently and react to it differently. Couple that with the fact that conflict usually includes strong emotion, and overwhelming emotion can overpower logic in seconds. So going through the aforementioned steps can be kind of a struggle at times. As a matter of fact, it is extremely difficult to even get past the first step in some circumstances. In some cases, we are unable to define the conflict appropriately to ourselves, let alone the person we're communicating with. Take a look at the clip below if you can. Check it out on YouTube or on the text-based version of this lecture. Take a look at the clip below from the breakup and listen to what they're saying. See if you can figure out what the actual problem is. What does Brooke really want from Gary? Think critically about content versus relational problems. I really think that's the key. It's a 3-minute clip. It'll go by fast. What does Brooke really want from Gary? And hopefully in the next conflict you experience, you're able to go through those resolution stages. And let me know if you have any questions.